Welcome to the podcast, The Margarita Way to Success. Today we have a beautiful Carolyn Wallace with us. She is a practicing psychotherapist, spiritual director, and certified archetypal consultant. Welcome, Carolyn. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I live in Western Massachusetts with my two children, and I see clients, my private practice as a therapist, and I'm also seeing clients as a spiritual director and archetypal consultant, which is the newer part of my business. And I'm really,
Can you tell me, please, mostly who are the people that come to see you and any issues that they experience? Maybe a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I work with women through work with archetypes. I call them spiritual women who consider themselves to be on some kind of a spiritual path, to heal shadow patterns in themselves, such as fear, so that they can stand in their own authority with unapologetic, radiant confidence. I want women to see that they already have the tools that they need in their lives to step into greater and greater levels of power and using their voice.
Sounds amazing. And how did you get to work on those issues specifically? Is there anything that you experienced in your past or something pushed you toward this experience?
Oh, there's so many different things. I'm actually writing an article right now about how I used work with archetypes to leave an unhappy marriage and step into becoming an entrepreneur. So very much so. Archetypes are a big part of how I navigate the world.
Can you name a few of them that we can resonate with?
Yeah, well, the ones that everyone would resonate with are the victim archetype, the saboteur archetype, the child, and the prostitute. And those four archetypes we call the survivors, the survival archetypes, because we needed all those skills to survive our childhoods and our past. And the problem is that those archetypes have kind of left us in patterns that maybe don't serve us so well as adults now. And so if we become conscious of the patterns that we're still stuck in, if we're not conscious of them, I call it driving around the same parking lot in circles. We don't really see how we can overcome and become the next step. So if we become conscious and say, oh, look, I'm acting like a victim now, or that's my saboteur coming forward, then if we can label it, then we know what the path is to step out into greater levels of power.
So when do you think mostly people find their inner expression more? You say this is survival mode to be in those archetypes while we're growing up, but then comes the point where we need to break through those archetypes and to express ourselves. Do you see something that actually similar to all of them and it happens around a certain age?
I don't necessarily see them happening at a certain age. I guess it depends on the level of trauma or difficulty someone has. I mean, if you were raised by truly loving parents in systems that supported you, financial systems, educational systems, with mature adults around you, kind of showing you, modeling positive ways of being in the world, lucky you, right? If that was your experience, then you come into adulthood more equipped to let your power come forward and to feel that you can make an impact on the world without too much difficulty. For those people who maybe were raised in less than ideal circumstances, whether it was their family of origin or the systems they grew up in, we may need a little more help, a little more encouragement to realize if we are stuck in, for example, being a victim, if we're stuck in having to compromise ourselves, if we're stuck in not taking the steps forward we need because of fear is stopping us, for example, we may need a little more help with identifying and encouragement to take the next steps. I think people just generally don't see that there's a path out of those patterns. And as you said earlier, we might not even see that we're in a pattern, right? So becoming conscious of the pattern we're in is so very important, because otherwise there's no stepping out of it.
And usually people who come to you, are they familiar with any concept or they need a lot of help to get out of this pattern?
My ideal clients at this point for archetypal consulting are people who've probably done some work in therapy and who consider themselves to be on a spiritual path. So they do have some awareness of their inner life, inner world, have maybe done some processing about their past, and are ready to really take that next step forward into the possibilities for their life, instead of talking about old patterns, which I think is a very important step for everyone, to talk about old stories, old patterns, old traumas. That's an important step. The next step is, now that I'm conscious of this, what do I do with this information? How do I evolve my life? How do I evolve my stories?
And Carolyn, do you see something that they share, a fear, that they all share the same fear, or each one of them is a different, totally different experiences?
I think there's as many different fears as there are people walking on the planet. I think ultimately it comes down to how much power do people feel like they have in order to protect themselves, keep themselves safe, and to get what they want in the world. If people feel empowered that they can do that, then that's just great. You know, they don't need as much help as someone who feels like, oh, I could never do that. I have way too much anxiety for that. Or I could never be someone that makes a lot of money, or I could never be someone who would ever find a happy relationship. You know, those are patterns that I can help people to break through with the right language. Yeah.
Why do you think it happens when people say, I never can do something, that blank?
Well, I think they're stuck in more of a victim mentality. And I can say that with confidence because I know it very well. I know that pattern very well for myself. And when we start to shine a light on, I listen for their language. When I start to shine a light on, well, if you're saying like, oh, I could never do this, it sounds like you're somewhere in the back of your mind. It sounds like you believe there's some unseen force kind of keeping you oppressed and not letting you move forward. Well, that's victim language. And the good news is that what the victim needs is to develop strong boundaries. And with enough boundaries, they can move into what we call a warrior archetype, where they can begin to even start with themselves, start with their own thoughts, tell themselves, that is not a loving thought. You know, that is not a loving thought that is going to propel my life forward. I may be getting sympathy if I say, oh, I'll never make enough money, just for example. I may have everyone around me saying, oh, yes, you poor thing, you'll probably never make enough money. And that like gives me some sort of power, but it's not the power I'm really wanting. I want to tell myself to stop that kind of language, kind of knock it off, right? And step into my warrior energy. What if I could be the creator of my life? And I could use language and have boundaries so that I can stop that level of thinking, stop letting those thoughts dominate me. If there's an outside force that is abusive or oppressive, I can have boundaries and say that needs to stop. I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. And that's how you evolve a victim archetype into just having much more power in the world that people can really get behind.
Can you tell me maybe one helpful technique or something that people can do when they stuck in the circle of victimizing themselves, and then they have validation around them that
Right.
they're really victims? How can they break through this circle of feeding each other?
Well, you have to ask yourself, what is it that you really want? Do you simply want to be stuck in your victim mode and get all the support and sympathy? And if that's true, then you don't have to change anything. You know, no one said you have to change anything at all. But if you really want to create something different, if you really want to, if you had a dream to create a relationship that you love, or create whatever it is, good money so that you can go on a vacation, whatever, if you want to really create those things, you're going to have to stop with the victim speak and start taking on a more warrior-like energy. And that's the challenge. That's the hard part, right? We're stepping from an old way of thinking into a new way of thinking. And it's not an easy path, but it's a path that many, many, many people have walked, and it's not impossible. And it's so very rewarding when you kind of get to the other side. Not that there won't be setbacks and all of a sudden you wake up one morning and say, oh, wow, I've been in victim mode for the past 30 minutes. I really need to figure out what I need to do to shift that thinking, because there's always the potential for slipping back, and it happens all the time. But for the most part, if you remember that you're the creator of your life and not the victim of your life, you can make a lot of progress, reminding yourself all the time where your power lies.
Yeah, it's just maybe to be aware of this and to know that we actually have the power to create. Because most of the people who victimize themselves, and I'm familiar with this as well, I think we all do on some level.
I'll do.
And even growing up in a mostly healthy environment, I would say mostly my family is an amazing family, and mom, dad who loved me too much. I would say even too much. But again, you grow up with so many fears, with so many uncomfortable situations, and so many, your voice is not out there, and you want to find it, you want to hold on for something. And when you victimize yourself, you not always know that you are the creator of your life.
Yeah.
Because you gave your power away for so long, so you don't have the power to create, you don't know about it anyway. And then comes a certain point where you should break through, and like you said, it's make me think about it. Maybe it's a good idea to ask yourself, is there more? Is there more? There's a seed of change. Is there more for me, right?
Right. Is this the life I really want to be living? If you could see what you want your life to look like in 5 or 10 years, are you doing that right now? And if the answer is no, then there's something probably that needs to change. And I like what you said earlier about we've given ourselves away for so long that we forget, we've never maybe developed the skills to use our voices in the way that we would like to be. And so there's a time where we have to say, look, I really don't have the skill to speak up. For example, say your boss is not treating you well, and you've been just afraid to speak up to your boss and to let them know like what you really think, you know, because it's way too scary. What if you lose your job, right? Well, that's where the prostitute archetype comes in. So we compromise ourselves so that we're not fired, or we're not making waves because it would be too scary. That would create too much tension, right? So what we need to do is develop the faith and trust and courage in ourselves that if we do use our voice, we're going to be okay, and the universe is going to support us in speaking and using our voice. And that doesn't always look like maybe you will get fired if you speak up. Maybe that is true. I hope that doesn't happen to anyone, but if it does, it still doesn't mean you should keep quiet. Women should be using their voices. And if there's some kind of a consequence like that, to have the trust and faith that you're going to be able to take care of yourself, because speaking your truth is always going to be more important than playing it safe and small and quiet.
You know what, I'm curious so much about the question that you asked earlier. If you ask a person, if the person asks himself or herself, in our case, do I want to stay victim in 5 years from now? Do you see, actually, you probably won't see because they come to you to see solutions, but do you think that there's people that actually will say, yes, I want to stay in this mode for 5-10 years?
You know, I don't know if they would actually say it like that, but I've worked with people, especially my therapy clients, you know, I've worked with people who say, you know, if I try to offer them a different way of thinking as a suggestion that they might want to think in a different way, they say, oh, well, that's just the way I was raised. And there's like, I hear that every once in a while. That's just the way I was raised. I'm not really interested in taking any of your suggestions or moving my life forward in any way. And then I say, well, you know, that's totally fine. That's their life. They have free will, and they're not going to make progress with that kind of mentality. I can appreciate the way they were raised. Maybe there were some good things about that, and they don't want to give up those things. If there's some loyalty there, all that is fine. But if there's not an evolution of their thinking, then they will stay stuck. And people are pretty straightforward about that. So that's up to them.
Yeah, it's true. It's only their decision. Each and one of us are responsible for everything that happens to us. And this is also something that maybe we should understand. And luckily, I understood it already. So that I'm responsible for good and bad that happens in my life. So there is many universal laws that people not aware of because they not see those like in physical world. So like the law of attraction,
That's right.
We attract everything that happens to us, and some people may say it's nonsense, but it is true. We are attract everything in our life. And I do want to ask you, when people ask, and this is my next question, when people ask, is there more? Can I actually break through being a victim of my life? What happens next? Do they start to attract something different into their life? Do they start considering therapy or make small changes in their life? What start happening next step after this question?
That's a really good question. And when you said small changes, I think that what happens is, so you realize that you're in a certain place and you want to make a change. Like, for example, if you're in a relationship that's really not working for you, I think the very first thing that comes up is a lot of anxiety that could be. Instead of feeling really empowered and you're going to, be gung-ho about creating this change, first thing is, wow, there's a lot of fear here, because if there wasn't fear, we would have made the change already, right? So the fear is what's keeping us from taking the next step forward. So instead of really blowing out your nervous system, what if there was one step you could take toward the life you want? And what we're doing is cultivating little bits of courage, little bit at a time, until you are ready to make that change that you want to see in your life. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to do it the next day after your first archetypal consulting session. What's the next step? It's like increasing your capacity to hold a little bit of fear and to see what those changes feel like in your body. Because, we want to be gentle with ourselves. We want the forward movement. Don't get me wrong. We want forward movement to happen, but you don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah, it's one step at a time. And yeah, there is a lot of things I can ask you, and I'm so curious about many things. But I do want to see if there is anything like, do you see connection between daily habits and breaking through fears?
Well, I guess there's a couple ways I could answer that. Breaking through fear. So if you're someone that just generally has a lot of anxiety, which I know well, I would say a daily habit would be how to take responsibility for regulating your nervous system would be maybe the first thing. So I remember when I found yoga, I felt like I had stepped into a whole different world where I didn't have to be revved up to a 10 out of 10 in my nervous system. I didn't even realize there was a way to live that wasn't a constant high level of stress and anxiety until I found yoga. And that was like my first foray into, I could actually feel differently. There's something I can do to change the way I'm feeling in my body. So if there's an anxiety sort of controlling your life, there are many, many, many resources out there. A lot of them are free to really help you regulate your nervous system a little bit. There's free meditation apps out there. There are yoga classes online on YouTube you can take. There's spiritual reading. There's just being in nature. So you can take responsibility for yourself that way. But if there's other fears, such as I don't have the power in me to get what I want out of life, for example, like that kind of a fear, then I think that's where archetypal consulting work or coaching or therapy can really help someone to identify where they're stuck and what are some next steps they can take to get where they want to be.
Yeah, can you tell something that everybody, all the listeners at this moment, they can do every day that will improve their day? It doesn't matter what fear they have. Even me and you and everybody who listens to this podcast right now can do daily practice of certain things that you will share with us and will improve their life in any direction they will take it.
Sure. So, every morning when you wake up, you can take a few deep breaths. I have a meditation practice every morning. You don't have to necessarily have something that regimented. But notice the quality of your thoughts. First thing in the morning, notice how you're thinking. Notice how you're speaking to yourself. Notice if you're living in anxiety or if you're living in possibility, for example. And just to notice the quality of your thoughts. And if you're living in some kind of fear-based, I'm not good enough. You really messed up yesterday. You should never have said that. You know, what if my boss wants to speak to me today? Like those kinds of fears. If those are not loving thoughts that are going to like really move your life forward, you have to take the responsibility for asking yourself, what's a more loving thought that I could be thinking right now? What's a different way I could be speaking to myself right now? And to spend however long it takes. Is it 10 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Is it an hour? Until you can get up from your meditation feeling like you're stepping into a life where there's love and kindness and compassion coming towards you instead of all the negative things. So
Yeah,
that's
it's a beautiful practice, and yeah, it's actually something that what I see, if I imagine it correctly, the practice that you described right now, it's how we can separate the negative thoughts from who we are, to separate those.
and just look at them as maybe these aren't even true. Maybe these are just an illusion. Maybe this has to do with the way you were raised, and that's the internal voice of whoever raised you kind of coming forward. What are your own thoughts? You know, instead of ruminating on a conversation you had 3 days ago and wishing you had done it differently, I mean, maybe you could say, maybe I did the best I can in the moment, and the next time I would do this, this, and this, and get kind of excited about the next time you have a conversation with that person, how you would like it to go, and get into the energy of that. It's just a more loving way of being for yourself.
Beautiful. And I see the frame with the chakras behind you, which is something really close to my heart as well. I also, like you, 500 RYT yoga instructor. So I'm curious what yoga brought to your life. In what way it changed your life, improved it in some way?
You know, I started doing yoga, before year 2000. So I'm dating myself. And like I said, when I took my first yoga class, I didn't realize that there's a way I could feel in my body that wasn't a 10 out of 10 of anxiety. Like I didn't even know that was a possibility. And so I went back and went back and went back to yoga class because I wanted to feel calm. I wanted to feel more in control of myself. And so I went all the way to become a certified Kripalu yoga teacher because I felt like I needed as much of that in my life as I could possibly get. And that was my motivation. And then, you know, when you're teaching yoga to other people, then you can bring it to others to help them regulate their nervous systems as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you so much. And you gave so many takeaways, but I will ask you again, maybe something different that you can say to the audience, to the listeners, something that you want to give as advice from you to them to live their dream life, to express their voice, and to be stronger.
What I would say is don't let yourself think that whatever your shadow patterns are the end of the story. You know, I used to be someone that says, I have too much anxiety. I could never possibly do that. And that was the end. But that's a shadow pattern, right? And what I realized through my work with archetypes is that's just the very, very beginning. To say, I have too much anxiety. Okay, well, maybe you do. That's not the end of your story. What are you going to do about it now? How are you going to evolve it? There's a path. There's a path to evolve those kinds of feelings, those kinds of fears. And the path, as much as it may bring you more anxiety when you first start out, it will lead to greater freedom.
Thank you so much. Is there anything you can share with the audience where we can find you and the work that you do? And
Sure.
social media maybe, or something that you want to share?
I'm on Facebook. It's Your Radiant Life. And my website is radiantlifedirection.com. And I am running a program right now called Archetypes in Action, 90 Days from Living in Shadow to Claiming Your Unapologetic Confidence. So you can find more information about that on my website.
It sounds beautiful, and I'll put the links under the videos and under the podcasts. And I thank you so much, Carolyn. It's beautiful what you shared with us today, and it was amazing. Thank you so much, and have a blessed day, everybody. And follow Carolyn. She has so much to share with the world and in her programs as well. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Margarita.